Queen Alexandria Lane is not the kind of street that makes headlines. It's a quiet residential stretch in Jackson, Mississippi, lined with modest homes and driveways, the kind of block where neighbors recognize each other's cars before they recognize each other's faces. For years, it existed exactly the way thousands of streets like it exist all across the country. Unremarkable, lived in, ordinary. On a Saturday night in late June 2026, that ordinariness ended. By the time police left that street, a 25-year-old mother, her 30-year-old sister, and her 2-year-old son were dead inside a home meant to be the safest place they had. This case would go on to involve 4 separate arrests, a manhunt that stretched from Mississippi to Texas, and a piece of evidence so unusual that it turned a devastating family tragedy into a story about how a stolen police weapon can travel for months before it ends up in the worst possible place. This is the story of what happened on Queen Alexandria Lane, the people who lost their lives there, and the investigation that slowly pieced together who was responsible. It was around 10 o'clock at night on June 27, 2026, when Jackson Police received a call reporting a shooting at a residence in the 300 block of Queen Alexandria Lane. Officers arrived to find what Police Chief Dr. Rachel Brackney later described as a horrifying scene. Inside, 3 people had been shot multiple times. There was nothing paramedics could do for any of them. All 3 were pronounced dead at the scene. The victims were identified by Hinds County Coroner Jeremiah Howard as 25-year-old Keyana Weathersby, her 30-year-old sister Erica Weathersby, and Keyana's 2-year-old son, Camari Givens. A mother, her sister, her toddler, 3 generations of one family, taken within the same walls, within the same few minutes. Brackney didn't soften her language when she spoke about it publicly. She called it a heinous crime and said whoever was responsible deserved the harshest punishment available under the law. Police chiefs don't often speak that bluntly in the first hours of an investigation. When they do, it usually means the scene itself said more than any official statement ever could. Keyana Weathersby was a mother first. Her son, Camari, was 2 years old, an age where a child is only beginning to understand the world around him, an age that makes it almost impossible to imagine him being the target of anything at all. Living alongside them, and deeply involved in raising that little boy, was Erica Weathersby, Keyana's older sister. By every account available, the 2 women were effectively raising Camari together, sharing the daily work of caring for a toddler the way sisters sometimes do when family becomes the primary support system a young mother has. That detail is part of what makes this case so difficult to sit with. Whoever walked into that home didn't take one person. They took both women responsible for a child's life, and then they took the child too. There was no one left in that house who could have protected him, because everyone who might have was already gone. The family's brother, DeMarco Bailey, spoke publicly in the days that followed. He described his sisters as hard-working women who looked out for each other and for the people around them. What he said he wanted, more than anything, was justice, not only for his sisters, but for his nephew as well. It's a short statement, but it carries the particular weight of someone forced to grieve 3 family members in a single breath. Someone who has to hold space for a 2-year-old's death alongside 2 adult sisters he'd known his entire life. To understand why this case hit Jackson so hard, it helps to understand the fragile hope the city was carrying into the summer of 2026. For years, Jackson has grappled with one of the highest per capita homicide rates in the nation, a stubborn reality that has tested residents and leaders alike. But the first months of 2026 brought cautious optimism. Homicide numbers had been declining for several consecutive years, and early 2026 totals stood among the lowest in more than a decade. City officials and community advocates began speaking, quietly but earnestly, about a possible turning point. Then came the night of June 27th, a triple homicide that claimed a mother, her sister, and her 2-year-old son, did more than shatter one family. It landed like a gut punch to that emerging sense of progress. In a city fighting to change its story, the brutal killing of a toddler in an ordinary home made many residents feel that hard-won gains could evaporate in a single evening. No neighborhood, no matter how quiet, suddenly felt truly safe. The tragedy didn't just expose ongoing vulnerabilities, it tested the community's belief that things were finally getting better. In the immediate hours after the shooting, there was no one in custody. Whoever had done this had fled the scene before officers arrived. Jackson Police described the situation in stark terms. The person or people responsible were considered armed and dangerous, and still out somewhere in the community. Investigators moved quickly to establish something that would shape the entire direction of the case. From the outset, they stated clearly and emphatically that they did not believe little Camari Givens had been caught in random crossfire. This was a targeted attack on the home. That distinction carried enormous weight. A stray bullet from a dispute on the street is a horrific tragedy of circumstance. But a deliberate entry into a specific residence, resulting in the execution-style killing of a mother, her sister, and her 2-year-old son, is something far more chilling. According to the Hinds County coroner, all 3 victims suffered multiple gunshot wounds, with Keyana and Camari shot in the head. Reports indicated the toddler was found defenseless in his bed. Someone had made a conscious decision, in advance, to enter that house on Queen Alexandria Lane and carried it out regardless of who was inside. By the following day, June 28th, investigators had already recovered a critical piece of physical evidence: the victim's own vehicle. A red 2020 Mitsubishi Mirage, belonging to one of the women, had been stolen from the scene. Police located it abandoned and unoccupied at Manhattan Park in North Jackson. Though the driver had already fled, the car provided investigators with a tangible thread: fingerprints, DNA, or surveillance footage that could link suspects to the crime. At the same time, the department was flooded with tips from residents. Chief Brackney would later publicly credit the community's response, noting that multiple pieces of information from the public helped identify the stolen vehicle and, ultimately, the individuals connected to it. In high-profile cases like this, the bridge between a bloody crime scene and swift arrests is often built not just by forensic evidence, but by ordinary neighbors willing to pick up the phone and speak up. The first major break came fast. On the evening of June 29th, just 2 days after the killings, a surge of tips from concerned residents helped investigators zero in on a specific vehicle believed to be connected to the triple homicide. That vehicle was spotted moving along Highway 18, near the intersection with Maddox Road. Jackson police officers moved in and attempted a traffic stop. The driver refused to comply, sped away, and triggered a tense, short-distance pursuit that wound through city streets as officers coordinated to contain the situation without endangering bystanders. The chase ended when law enforcement successfully boxed the vehicle in and forced it to a stop. As officers approached with weapons drawn, they took 2 men into custody without further incident: Cornelius Carter and Jordan Carter, both 28 years old. Despite sharing the same last name, the 2 men were not related, a coincidental detail that has been widely noted in local coverage, placing 2 otherwise unconnected individuals together as co-defendants in one of Jackson's most disturbing triple homicides. Both were immediately charged with capital murder. Cornelius Carter faced an additional felony charge of being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, a direct violation of legal restrictions tied to his prior convictions. What added an especially unsettling layer to the arrest was the discovery that Cornelius was still wearing an active ankle monitor at the time he was taken into custody. He had been under court-ordered electronic supervision when the shootings on Queen Alexandria Lane occurred, meaning he was already being monitored by the justice system, even as prosecutors now allege he participated in the killings. His criminal history stretched back years and had repeatedly drawn the attention of authorities. In 2015, Cornelius faced indictments for using a vehicle to strike 3 Jackson Police Department detectives during an encounter. While being held in the Hinds County Detention Center on those charges, he was accused of attempting to escape custody and causing physical damage to the facility. These prior incidents painted a picture of someone the system had flagged as dangerous on multiple occasions long before the events of June 27th. Jordan Carter also brought a serious criminal background. Court records show he had previously been convicted in connection with aggravated assault, kidnapping, and carjacking charges stemming from a 2016 incident. He had served time in prison before his release. The fact that both men, with their documented histories of violence, were allegedly involved in the same targeted home invasion only intensified public shock. Both Carters were transported to the Hinds County Detention Center. They made their initial court appearances the following day, June 30th. After reviewing the charges and the men's extensive criminal records, a judge denied bond for both, determining they posed a significant risk to the community if released. The same day the Carters appeared in court, a third suspect was arrested. 25-year-old Mikayla Young was booked into the Hinds County Detention Center on a charge of capital murder. She made her initial court appearance the following day, where a judge likewise denied her bond. What investigators publicly detailed about Young's involvement stands as one of the most difficult and morally complex threads in this entire case. According to police, she was the getaway driver who transported Cornelius Carter and Jordan Carter directly to the residence on Queen Alexandria Lane. She knew in advance that the purpose of the trip was an armed robbery. When gunfire erupted inside the home, Young drove away from the scene, leaving the 2 men behind. While she was not inside the house at the moment the shots were fired, authorities allege her role was essential. She provided the transportation that enabled the suspects to reach the targeted location, and she had been aware of the violent intent long before any of them arrived. This revelation reframes the entire incident in important ways. It establishes a clear chain of premeditation, not a group of individuals who simply crossed paths with tragic results, but a coordinated operation in which responsibilities were divided ahead of time. Young's alleged decision to drive the men there, wait, and then flee once the shooting began raises profound questions about accountability, complicity, and the points at which someone aware of a dangerous plan still chooses to move forward. Prosecutors are treating her actions as integral to the capital murder charges, arguing that logistical support with knowledge of the robbery's armed nature makes her fully culpable for the deadly outcome. For those closely following the case, Young's age and her position as the driver have added another layer of heartbreak and frustration. Here was a young woman who, according to the investigation, had multiple opportunities to reconsider or withdraw support before the violence unfolded, yet allegedly did not. Her arrest helped close one chapter of the manhunt, but it also left many in the community grappling with how such planning could culminate in the deaths of a mother, her sister, and a defenseless 2-year-old. With 3 suspects now behind bars, Chief Brackney noted publicly that investigators still believed other persons of interest were connected to the case. The investigation, in other words, was far from finished.
So as we have said every time I've stood before you when it comes to these type of crimes, we will solve them. We will find you. We will continue to make arrests in these cases. So although you may think initially that you got away with a crime, it doesn't stop just because you left the scene. We will continue to investigate each and every crime because every victim in the city of Jackson deserves authentic justice and not lip service from us.
While the search for a 4th suspect continued, Jackson police revealed a detail that transformed an already devastating family tragedy into one with far-reaching implications for the entire department and city. During the traffic stop that led to the arrests of Cornelius Carter and Mikayla Young, investigators recovered several firearms from the vehicle. Among them was a short-barreled semi-automatic rifle, specifically a department-issued SWAT weapon. Forensic testing at the Mississippi State Crime Lab combined with shell casings and other evidence from the Queen Alexandria Lane crime scene, led Chief Brackney to state that investigators held a presumptive belief the rifle had been used in the killings. Full ballistic confirmation was still pending at the time of the announcement. Here is where the story takes a particularly unsettling turn. This was not a weapon stolen the night of the murders. It had been taken roughly 8 weeks earlier, during a series of targeted vehicle burglaries at apartment complexes across Jackson. According to Brackney, the thieves broke into multiple marked law enforcement vehicles belonging to 3 separate agencies. 2 vehicles were successfully burglarized, including the Jackson Police Department unit, while a third attempt on another agency's vehicle failed. The SWAT officer to whom the rifle was assigned reported the theft immediately upon discovery. The vehicle was processed by the department's mobile crime scene unit, and the missing firearm was promptly entered into the National Crime Information Center database. For nearly 2 months, the weapon remained unrecovered, its location unknown to law enforcement. Its reappearance in the hands of suspects now charged in the triple homicide has raised serious questions about police equipment security. A firearm issued to protect the public had instead ended up connected to one of Jackson's most horrific crimes, the killing of a mother, her sister, and her 2-year-old son inside their own home. Chief Brackney was careful to place responsibility squarely on the individuals who stole the rifle and those accused of using it, emphasizing that the fault did not lie with the department itself. Mayor John Horn later confirmed that the SWAT officer whose vehicle was burglarized faced an internal review and potential disciplinary action, acknowledging that leaving such a powerful weapon unsecured in a parked vehicle was unacceptable. Still, the episode underscores a hard truth. Even brief gaps in how law enforcement secures equipment can have lethal consequences. A rifle intended to safeguard the community sat vulnerable long enough to travel through the streets of Jackson and ultimately into a family's living room with fatal results. The discovery added a new layer of outrage and scrutiny to an already painful case. Even with 3 people in custody, Jackson police made clear this case wasn't closed. Evidence continued pointing toward a 4th person believed to be connected to the killings, and the search for that person eventually crossed state lines entirely. On July 1, 2026, 32-year-old Devone Modacure was arrested in Forney, Texas, located in Kaufman County. The arrest was carried out by the Kaufman County Sheriff's Office, working in coordination with the U.S. Marshals Service and the Texas Department of Public Safety. He was taken into custody in the 1400 block of Kirkhill Lane and booked on a capital murder charge tied directly to the Jackson killings. Brackney confirmed the arrest at a news conference on July 2nd and reiterated the same position investigators had held from the very beginning. This was a targeted attack, not a random act of violence. Modacure's extradition back to Mississippi took roughly 2 weeks. He arrived in Jackson and appeared in court on July 16th, facing 3 counts of capital murder, 1 for each victim, along with aggravated assault, armed robbery of an individual, auto theft, being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, and burglary of an occupied dwelling. That armed robbery charge lines up directly with what investigators had already said about Young's role, that this was, at its core, a robbery that ended in 3 deaths. Like the 3 suspects before him, Modacure was denied bond during his initial appearance. Reporting into Devone Modacure's background revealed a criminal record stretching back more than a decade, and it raises difficult questions this case still hasn't fully answered. Jackson police first charged him in 2012 for shooting into an occupied vehicle. Later that same year, he was indicted on a charge of motor vehicle theft. In 2014, he was arrested again, this time for possession of a stolen firearm. By October of 2015, he had pleaded guilty to a cluster of serious offenses: robbery, carjacking, motor vehicle theft, and shooting into a vehicle. He served time in Mississippi Department of Corrections custody, with reporting indicating his sentence was shortened after he took on additional responsibilities as a trustee and completed extra programs while incarcerated. Less than a year after his release, a confrontation with Jackson Police ended with him being shot by officers. He later pleaded guilty to a federal charge of being a felon in possession of a firearm and served 3 years in federal prison as a result. Even after his release from federal custody, Modacure's legal troubles continued. Court records show he was out on bond, awaiting grand jury action on multiple drug felonies and a felony fleeing charge at the time of the killings. Just weeks earlier, he had been arrested on new drug possession charges involving counterfeit oxycodone, yet his bond was reduced shortly before the triple homicide occurred. And here is the detail that stands out above all the others. At the time Keyana Weathersby, Erica Weathersby, and Camari Givens were killed, Devone Modacure was free in the community. A man with a documented history involving stolen firearms, armed robbery, carjacking, and repeated violent confrontations with police was not behind bars when this tragedy unfolded. That fact has become part of a larger, uncomfortable conversation surrounding this case, one that isn't only about who allegedly pulled the trigger, but about how the system's earlier decisions on bail, sentencing, and supervision intersected, fatally, with this family. By the time all the arrests were finished, 4 people stood charged with capital murder in connection with the same triple homicide: Cornelius Carter, Jordan Carter, Mikayla Young, and Devone Modacure. All 4 were denied bond. All 4 now face the long legal process tied to the deaths of a mother, her sister, and her 2-year-old son. It's worth sitting with that number for a moment. 3 people were killed. 4 people have been charged in connection with causing those deaths. That ratio alone tells you this wasn't the act of one person acting alone in a single moment of rage. It was, according to everything investigators have laid out publicly, a coordinated crime, a getaway driver who knew the plan in advance, men allegedly responsible for carrying it out inside the home, and a weapon that had already been sitting stolen in the community for 2 months before it was used to end 3 lives. The full scope of charges against the group, including aggravated assault, armed robbery of an individual, auto theft, burglary of an occupied dwelling, and multiple felon in possession counts, paints a picture of a deliberate operation that went horribly wrong, or exactly as intended. As these cases move forward in the courts, the community continues to seek answers, not just about what happened inside that house on Queen Alexandria Lane, but about the broader failures that allowed it to happen at all. In the weeks following the killings, the Weathersby family laid Keyana, Erica, and Camari to rest. Funeral arrangements were handled through West Haven Memorial Funeral Home, and the service carried the particular weight of burying 3 family members, spanning 3 generations, at the same time. For a family already stretched thin by grief, there was no version of that day that offered any real comfort, only the small mercy of being able to say goodbye together. Jackson's mayor, John Horn, addressed the case publicly on more than one occasion. He commended police for the work that led to the early arrests, and he offered his condolences to a family he said was carrying an enormous loss. It was a public acknowledgement that this case had become something the entire city was watching, not just the residents who lived closest to Queen Alexandria Lane. Even with 4 people now charged, this case still carries real, unresolved threads. Police have declined to say whether there was any personal connection between the victims and the suspects, and they've been careful not to speculate publicly on any deeper motive beyond the armed robbery charge already filed. That leaves a genuine gap in the story. Robbery may explain why someone entered that home in the first place, but it doesn't fully explain why a 2-year-old ended up among the victims, or why investigators were so quick and so consistent in describing this as targeted rather than random from the very first day. There's also the still unresolved question of the rifle's 2-month journey between an apartment complex burglary and a Jackson living room, and what that gap says about how law enforcement equipment gets secured, or fails to get secured, against theft. And there's the matter of Devone Modacure being free on bond, with an already violent record on file, at the exact moment these 3 lives were taken, a fact that will likely follow this case through whatever legal proceedings come next. As the cases against Cornelius Carter, Jordan Carter, Mikayla Young, and Devone Modacure move through the courts, some of these questions may eventually be answered in more detail. For now, what's certain is this: a mother, her sister, and her son were killed inside their own home on a quiet Jackson street. 4 people have been charged with causing their deaths, and a family that describes them as hardworking and devoted to one another is still waiting for the justice they asked for from the very first day this nightmare began. If you want to follow how cases like this one continue to develop, please consider subscribing to this channel. This video is based on publicly available law enforcement statements, court records, and news reporting related to this case. Details may be updated or clarified as legal proceedings continue, and all individuals named who are facing charges are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This content is presented for informational purposes and is offered with respect for the victims and the family still grieving their loss.
To let them know that there are people in the community that care, that's praying, that even in the midst of this devastating catastrophe, that there is still hope, there's still humanity that exists.